Nora Sullivan was 28, living alone in a tiny Brooklyn apartment, surrounded by books, routines, and one too many bad dates. She thought her life was simple, safe, even a little boring. Until one night, when a bleeding stranger collapsed outside her window. She had no idea that letting him in would pull her into a world of secrets, danger, and the kind of passion that turns her whole life upside down. March was ending. The streets of Brooklyn were unusually quiet that night. A heavy mist clung to the sidewalks, wrapping everything in a hushed silvery veil. The yellow glow of scattered street lamps flickered against the wet pavement, casting long dancing shadows that made the empty road feel both eerie and strangely cinematic. The only sound was the occasional drip of water from a rusted fire escape above. Nora Sullivan stood by her window, her arms folded tightly across her chest as she watched the fog roll in. Her apartment, nestled above the quiet corner bookstore she worked at, was dimly lit, except for the reading lamp on the side table. A steaming mug of tea sat untouched beside a worn copy of The Picture of Dorian Gray. This view, dim streetlights, rusted fire escapes, the occasional silhouette moving through shadow, had become a kind of comfort. She always liked watching without being seen, and then she saw him. A movement. A man, barely visible at first, stumbled under the flickering streetlight across from her building. He wasn't just walking, he was limping, one arm hanging oddly, the other clutching his side. At first she thought it was a drunk, or someone tripping on cracked pavement. But this wasn't that. The body that dropped near the dumpster at the end of the block didn't stumble. It collapsed. Her heart began to pound, the kind of slow climbing panic that felt like cold water pouring under her skin. She was already on her feet before she realized it, grabbing the hoodie from the back of her chair and slipping on her boots with shaking hands. "It's probably nothing," she whispered to herself, "just someone sleeping it off." But her gut told her otherwise. She burst through the front door and into the night, the wind biting at her cheeks, eyes locked on the motionless figure. She dropped to her knees beside him. The man was slumped on the ground, breathing heavily. His face was smeared with blood, a fresh gash above his brow still dripping. One eye was already purpling, and there was a split in his lip. But what struck her most was his build. Tall, broad-shouldered, his bronzed skin tense with pain. His long, dark blonde hair was matted with blood, sticking to his temple. Nora's breath caught in her throat. He was tall, muscular, the kind of body that didn't belong on a broken curb in Brooklyn. "Hey," she said gently, crouching beside him. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, a hazy mix of confusion and guarded awareness. "Yeah," he rasped. "I'm fine." "That's a lie," she muttered, tearing a strip from her scarf and pressing it to his forehead. He winced but didn't pull away. His breathing was shallow, and every now and then, his jaw clenched like he was bracing against more than just physical pain. "I need to get you off the street." "No hospital," he said quickly, his hand gripping her wrist with surprising strength. His eyes, now clearer, locked onto hers. "No hospital, please, they'll find me." Nora hesitated. Her instinct screamed to call 911, but his voice, hoarse, desperate, rang in her ears. Who was they? Why didn't he want help? Something deeper. Something old and rooted in her kicked in. A memory of her mother saying, "Not everyone who falls is lost. Some just need a place to land." She didn't know who this man was, but something in his expression, raw, desperate, kept her rooted. "Okay," she whispered, "but you'll need to trust me." She helped him to his feet, looping his arm over her shoulders. He was heavy, over 6 feet tall, solid with muscle and clearly trying to mask how much pain he was in. Together, they made it up the stairs, one agonizing step at a time. Inside her apartment, she eased him onto the couch. He sank into the cushions with a grunt, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge. Nora knelt beside him, brushing his hair back to examine the wound more closely. The metallic tang of blood filled the air. And that's when she really looked at him. Even barely conscious, he looked like someone out of place. Too clean-cut, too expensive. His skin held a sun-warmed bronze tone, his jaw sharp and stubborn, his lips full but tight with tension. His watch, though cracked, was clearly luxury, and in his inner pocket, a sleek metal key fob, with no brand but a symbol she didn't recognize. This man wasn't homeless, and he definitely wasn't drunk. "You're not just anyone, are you?" she murmured, brushing the blood from his brow. "So what kind of man ends up bleeding on a stranger's street, with a watch worth more than her rent?" "I've had worse," he said, voice faint. "I haven't," she replied. "So let me concentrate." He gave a faint, amused grunt, then winced again. Nora rose, heading to the bathroom to gather supplies. Behind her, the man exhaled, eyes following her silhouette until they finally shut from exhaustion. Her apartment wasn't large. It smelled faintly of burnt coffee and rosemary, from the pasta she'd barely touched earlier, and the space was warmed only by a creaky radiator near the window. Julian awoke to the scent of something warm and comforting. "God, I need coffee," he thought. The apartment was still dim, the early gray light of dawn just beginning to seep through the windows. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Then the pain hit. A dull throb pulsed at his temples, and his ribs protested even the smallest movement. He shifted slightly on the couch and looked down. His shirt was gone, and his chest was clean, bandaged carefully, the skin around the bruises wiped free of blood. Whatever had happened the night before, one thing was clear. He was alive, and for the first time in days, maybe even weeks, he didn't feel like he was running. A low creak drew his eyes to the doorway. Nora stood there, holding a steaming mug of coffee in one hand, a small bottle of antiseptic in the other. As he took in the room, Nora's eyes stayed on him, quietly studying every move. Even under the torn shirt, she could see the outline of tight abs, the kind you didn't get from good genes alone. This man trained. A lot. His hair was a sun-kissed brown, mussed and slightly damp from either sweat or snowmelt, and his skin, now that she really looked, carried that unmistakable bronze tone of someone who lived in warmer places, or at least, someone who wasn't used to Brooklyn's bitter March. But it was his face that held her attention the longest. Sharp jawline, defined cheekbones, and even unconscious, his features carried a kind of cool arrogance, like the world owed him something and he was just waiting to collect. "Snob," she whispered before she could stop herself. "Beautiful, entitled, probably unbearable." "You're awake," she said simply, setting the coffee down on the table beside him. Julian studied her for a beat, then nodded once. "Yeah, unfortunately." Nora sat down on the armrest, not touching him yet. "Can I check your ribs?" He hesitated, then gave a small nod. She reached forward, gently pulling aside the bandages. Her fingers were cool, precise. She tried not to notice how his muscles twitched beneath her fingers. "Oh God, focus, Nora, don't look at him," she told herself. She wrapped his ribs gently. There was a gash above his eyebrow and a cut near his collarbone. Both looked painful, but shallow. When she pressed the bandage in place, his body jerked slightly and she froze. Eyes, steel blue, and no longer dazed. Julian Andrews, 35, born in San Francisco. That's what the ID said. But the man lying in front of her? Who the hell are you, really? Nora thought, her eyes narrowing as if the answer might be hidden somewhere behind those ice-blue eyes. "What's your name?" she asked, like she didn't just read it off his ID, as if they were two old friends catching up. He didn't answer. "You were lying in the street," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You were bleeding. I brought you up. You said not to call anyone." His brow furrowed, but something like realization passed through his gaze. He sat up too quickly, groaned, and fell back against the cushions. His abs flexed under the strain, and Nora tried not to stare. Tried and failed. "Well, Julian," she said, arching an eyebrow, "you're lucky you only ended up with a mild concussion and bruised ribs, and possibly a punctured ego." At the sound of his name from her lips, the man froze. "I didn't tell you my name," he said. Nora smirked and walked over to the counter, picking something up. She flipped a small ID card between her fingers. "You dropped this when you passed out. It slid out of your back pocket." Julian leaned back and exhaled slowly, eyeing her with more curiosity now. "Do you always go through the belongings of unconscious strangers?" "Only the ones bleeding on my doorstep," she replied dryly. He gave a slight chuckle, then winced. "Remind me not to get on your bad side." "Too late," she said, dabbing at the dried blood on his cheek. Their eyes met. Julian cleared his throat. "Thank you. Nurse Nora." Nora froze where she stood. Her eyes flicked to his face, sharp with sudden awareness. "I don't recall telling you my name," she said cautiously, her tone calm but edged with suspicion. Julian nodded toward the table beside the lamp. Nora followed his gaze and spotted the small photo frame sitting there. It held a picture of her from a summer afternoon, laughing, sun-kissed, hair caught in the wind. Scrawled across the bottom in colorful ink were the words, "Happy B-Day, Nora. Love you." Nora narrowed her eyes, the corner of her mouth twitching despite herself. Julian shrugged. "I notice things." "Well, I guess we're even," Nora said, trying to sound cool, forcing a smile. She turned on her heel and walked toward the bathroom, cursing herself with every step. God, Nora. Seriously? Getting all flustered over some wounded, dangerous stranger who shows up at your door? How pathetic can you be? Nora paced in the living room, turning in circles, not quite sure what to do with herself. Should she be scared of him? Was he dangerous? What if he hurt her? But he was wounded, and she was the one trying to help him. Great. Just great. Invite a potential killer into your house, patch him up yourself, and then… what? Get murdered for the courtesy? She stopped walking and pressed her fingers to her temples. God, stop. Just stop. There was a man, likely not a killer, lying in her guest room. A man who, by some cosmic joke, happened to be the most physically attractive male she'd ever seen. And mysterious. Too mysterious. That's what I should be thinking about, she told herself. What the hell I'm supposed to do with him? Not these ridiculous horror fantasies. Just then, something by the door caught her eye. A small black object. Hard, sleek, metallic. She walked over, crouched down, and picked it up. No logo, no writing. Just a single symbol. Like an engraving. Abstract and sharp. Like something military. Or tech. Or maybe both. Her brows furrowed as she turned it over in her hand. "What the hell are you mixed up in, mystery man?" she whispered. "Talking to yourself?" Julian's voice made her jump. She turned to see Julian standing a few steps into the room, one hand resting on the wall for balance. His shirt clung to him, slightly rumpled from lying down, and his movements were slower, stiff, cautious, but his eyes were sharp, very awake. He gave the room a quick once-over, then smirked. "Cozy place. Bit too clean. You sure you're not secretly a serial killer?" Nora blinked, caught between surprise, annoyance, and something she wasn't ready to name. "Would I be feeding you soup if I were?" He shrugged, leaning slightly against the doorway. "Maybe. Could be part of the long con. Lure the target in with warm food and soft lighting." Nora let out a dry laugh, folding her fingers around the object before slipping it into her pocket. Please, if I were running a con, you'd be the last person I'd target. Now that's just hurtful, he said, raising a brow. Good. Means you're healing. And she handed him the bowl. Here, eat. You look like you haven't had a real meal in days. Julian accepted the bowl, his fingers brushing hers briefly. He noticed the small calluses on her hands, the faint ink smudge on her wrist. Details. He always noticed details. You're not a nurse, are you? He asked, sipping the broth. No, she said, grabbing a cloth to rewrap his ribs. But I read a lot, and I know how to keep someone from dying in my living room. He studied her again, this time with a bit more care. Her eyes were green, not the kind that sparkled or danced, but clear, steady, and hard to look away from. She was focused, her movements precise, but there was a quiet ease in the way she handled things. No panic, no fuss. As she leaned in to secure the bandage, a faint scent reached him. Lavender, subtle and clean. It reminded him of Mendocino, his grandmother's porch, summer air, sun-warmed wood, and the soap she always used by the sink. A detail he hadn't thought of in years. Her fingers brushed his skin for a moment. Light, almost clinical. But even in his fog, he felt the contrast between her calm and his disoriented state. She wore a faded gray sweatshirt, loose at the collar, slipping off one shoulder, paired with black leggings. Her hair, long and light brown, was pulled into a messy half-knot at the top of her head. It was the kind of look that didn't try to impress anyone. Julian had always liked that. Natural, unpolished, real. His eyes flicked down, long legs, steady hands, hair pulled back, but still catching the light. Nothing about her screamed extraordinary, and yet, he noticed. Just observations, he told himself. A simple scan. Nothing more. Why are you really helping me? Julian asked, quieter this time. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she tied the final knot in the gauze and sat back. I'm not sure, she admitted, but something tells me you're not the kind of man who ends up half dead in front of a stranger's building without a story worth hearing. Julian's eyes narrowed faintly. There was an edge in her tone, a challenge almost. You're right, he said. She tilted her head. About which part? All of it. A beat of silence passed. Then Nora stood, picking up the tray again. Finish the soup, she said, walking back toward the kitchen. And then, maybe you can start explaining who or what the hell you're running from. Julian's lips curved ever so slightly. Maybe I already stopped. The morning sun had just begun to edge its way through the blinds, casting thin gold lines across Nora's hardwood floor. The apartment was quiet, save for the ticking of the kitchen clock and the soft rustle of the radiator. Julian stood at the window, his eyes narrowed, body tense. He hadn't touched his coffee. They're here. His voice was low, almost inaudible, but the gravity in it sliced through the silence like a blade. Nora looked up from where she was wiping the kitchen counter. What? Julian didn't turn around. 2 black SUVs parked across the street. They've been idling for 3 minutes. Nora moved closer, instinctively drawn to the window, but he held up a hand. Don't. Stay out of view. Something in his tone made her stomach clench. Not fear. Something deeper. Protective. Who are they? She asked. Julian finally turned to face her. His jaw was tight. I can't explain everything right now. The less you know, the better. For now. Nora crossed her arms, her voice low but firm. You don't get to pull the mysterious stranger card again, not when my apartment is about to become a crime scene. He stepped closer, eyes locked on hers. I know. And you're right to be angry. But this isn't a movie, Nora. It's not a game. The moment you helped me, you stepped into something real. dangerous. And if they know I was here? His voice faltered for half a second. Then I won't let them hurt you. Her breath caught. He wasn't being dramatic. This wasn't a line. There was something raw in the way he said it. I need the fob, he said, more gently now. She frowned. The metal thing? Why? It's the reason they're here. It is a kind of hard disk holds something they want, something they can't have. Then give it to them. It's not that simple. If they get it, they don't just come after me. They go after everything and everyone I ever cared about. Nora hesitated. I can go to the police. Julian shook his head. Too slow, too exposed, and not all of them are clean. He looked at her again, this time with a softness that unnerved her more than the danger. I won't let them touch you. The second you helped me, you became my responsibility, and I'm not losing you too. Too. The word lingered in the air. Julian. We have to go. Now. She didn't move. He took a step forward, closing the space between them. Nora, please. Trust me. Just this once. The door buzzer echoed sharply through the apartment. They both froze. Julian's eyes snapped to the fire escape. Get your coat. She grabbed the fob from the counter and shoved it into her bag, adrenaline flooding her veins. Julian unlatched the window, pulled it open, then turned back and offered her his hand. Come on. Outside, the air bit cold against their skin. They climbed out onto the fire escape, the rusted metal groaning beneath their weight. Julian led, moving fast but careful, his injuries slowing him just enough to make her worry. They crossed to the next building over, hearts pounding, footsteps muffled by the wind. Behind them, the apartment buzzer rang again, longer this time. A voice called out from the street, indistinct, male, commanding. Nora didn't look back. By the time they reached the alley 2 buildings down, Julian was already on the phone. It's Andrews. I have the package. We need an extraction. Pause. Yes. Her too. He looked away for a moment. When he met her eyes again, they were darker, more certain. Negative. She stays. You want the fob? You take both of us. He hung up, breath visible in the cold air, and turned to her. Get ready. Things are about to get strange. Nora looked at him, heart still racing. Stranger than this? His lips curved, just barely. You have no idea. They ran. The roof was slick with melting frost. The sky above them a dull slate gray, heavy with clouds that promised more rain. Nora's breath came in sharp bursts as she followed Julian across the narrow rooftop, her boots slipping on the uneven surface. Her heart thundered with a panic she hadn't fully grasped until this very moment. This wasn't some strange, injured man anymore. This was real. Dangerously real. Julian moved with surprising speed despite his injuries, his body coiled with purpose. At the far end of the roof, he stopped and turned to her. We need to move fast, he said, his voice low but urgent. They're not just looking for the device. They saw you. That puts you in this now, whether you like it or not. Nora opened her mouth to speak, to protest, but he stepped closer, his hands coming up to grip her shoulders, steady but not rough. You helped me. That makes you a liability to them. But to me, it makes you my responsibility. I won't let anything happen to you, Nora. You have my word. Something in his voice cut through the chaos, a steel-edged sincerity, not desperation, not even fear, just truth. She gave a shaky nod. Okay. What now? Julian glanced over the edge of the roof, calculating. Below, a fire escape clung to the brick wall like an afterthought. We're jumping across to the next building, he said, then down the alley. There's a car waiting a few blocks away. A car? He didn't elaborate. She didn't press. Together, they made the leap. It wasn't graceful. Nora landed hard, one knee slamming against the concrete. She hissed in pain, but Julian was already pulling her up, steadying her with one arm as they moved. They descended the fire escape in silence, the sound of distant engines and shouting voices echoing behind them. At the bottom, Julian paused, peering out into the alley. "Come on," he said. They slipped into the shadows. The safe house was a small, nondescript apartment tucked behind an old laundromat in Midtown. Inside, it was sparsely furnished: a couch, a table, a kitchenette. No photos, no windows facing the street. A place designed to be forgotten. Julian bolted the door behind them and finally let out a breath. Nora leaned against the wall, her hands trembling now that the adrenaline had begun to ebb. "You said they saw me. Who are they?" Julian ran a hand through his hair, then reached into his coat and pulled out the small black fob. "You want answers? Fine. But this doesn't leave this room? Ever." Nora nodded slowly. "I'm an AI systems architect, and I was the co-founder of a tech company in Palo Alto. We were developing advanced neural prediction models, behavioral AI." Nora blinked. "Like reading minds?" He gave a humorless laugh. "Not exactly, but close enough to terrify the right people and tempt the wrong ones." He turned the fob in his hand. "This holds the only backup of our core system. My brother Adrian and I built it. He was the genius. I was the one who could sell it to the world." He paused. A shadow passed behind his eyes. Adrian figured out too late what the others wanted it for: predictive control, surveillance, manipulation at a scale you can't even imagine. He tried to wipe it all. And then... He didn't finish. Nora didn't need him to. Her voice was soft. "They said it was suicide." Julian looked up, startled. He stared at her for a long moment, then looked away. "He left a message for me, a location, a box in a New York bank. This," he held up the fob, "was inside, along with instructions to find one person he trusted, a contact in the FBI. So what now?" Julian looked up, his expression hardening. "Now we call him, and we vanish." Within hours, the safe house was no longer theirs. Two black sedans pulled into the alley, headlights off. The night felt thick with purpose. From one of the vehicles, a small, highly trained team emerged, faces unreadable, movements rehearsed. One man moved straight to Julian, flashed a badge once, quickly. "Julian Andrews. Good to finally meet. I believe you have something that needs protecting. From the wrong people, and sometimes even from the right ones." Julian gave a short nod, shielding Nora slightly behind him. A second agent, gloved and silent, approached the table where Julian had left the fob. Without a word, he locked it into a biometric case and vanished into the other vehicle. Julian's posture tensed. "Where are we going, Detective?" He looked past Julian, giving a small, respectful nod to Nora. "And you two? You're officially under witness protection. I'm here to get you somewhere safe." "Somewhere safe?" Nora asked, her brows drawn. Everything since last night felt unreal, like she'd stepped into someone else's life, a chaotic, dangerous one. "Yes, Charleston, quiet place, coastal air, temporary safe house. You'll like the porch." Morris paused, eyes scanning the room. "You'll stay there until we finish cleaning up the rest of this mess. The Bureau recommends at least 30 days of low visibility. After that, you can talk about options." Nora swallowed. "What about our lives?" Morris turned. "Whatever you do, don't go back to them. Not yet. You need to disappear until this thing is buried deeper than the Mariana Trench." He headed for the door, but stopped. "You've got 5 minutes. Pack light. You're not taking the memories with you anyway." The agents moved like clockwork. Efficient. Emotionless. By the time Julian and Nora stepped outside, the alley had become a silent corridor of transition. No goodbye. No ceremony. just an ending, and the beginning of something else. Charleston waited. It had been a week since they arrived in Charleston, and every morning Nora still woke up asking herself the same question: what am I doing? She was living in a strange city, in a borrowed life, with a man she barely knew. But the fear that had gripped her in the beginning had started to loosen its hold, replaced slowly by something else: curiosity. The house was a classic Charleston home: 2 stories, white shutters, a wide porch with rocking chairs, tucked into a quiet street where birdsong filled the air. In the early days, they kept their distance. Nora read in the sunroom. Julian sat silently on the porch. But they shared dinner each night, breaking the silence with light conversation, learning how to exist in the same space without unraveling. Getting used to someone you didn't know was strange, but with each passing day, she learned something new about him. And that house. That house began to feel just a little more familiar. That day began brighter than usual. Nora woke up without dread pressing at her chest. Sunlight filtered softly through the gauzy curtains of the small guest room, casting faint shadows on the wooden floor. She stretched under the crisp sheets, then sat up slowly, brushing her hair off her face. Maybe today I'll stop acting like I've been kidnapped, she thought. Maybe I'll pretend it's just a vacation. With a half smile, she stood and padded toward the wardrobe. For 7 days straight, she'd lived in jeans and oversized t-shirts. Practical, comfortable, boring. But last night she'd noticed a few unfamiliar hangers in the closet. Dresses, neat and untouched. FBI must have stalked the house in advance, down to every detail. Did the FBI guess my size? She whispered, pulling one of them out. Should I be flattered or alarmed? Either they're terrifyingly efficient or someone out there has access to my online shopping history, she muttered. She shook her head, laughing to herself. Okay, my sarcastic inner monologue is back. Maybe I really am starting to settle in. Her fingers landed on a sleeveless white dress, simple, but with a neckline just low enough to make her hesitate. Still, Charleston's early April weather was warm and breezy. She slipped it on. It fit perfectly. A glance in the mirror made her stop. Okay, she whispered. That's a bit much. Neckline's a bit low, she murmured. But I guess I'll survive. But there wasn't much else to choose from, and something in her felt a little lighter today. If she was going to be trapped in this charade, she might as well feel good doing it. She ran her fingers through her hair, tied it loosely, and headed for the door. As she turned to grab her sandals, she swung open the door and collided with a wall of damp skin and steam. Julian! Fresh from the shower, he was a wall of warm skin, damp hair, and clean soap. The towel around his waist slipped just enough to send a lightning bolt of panic through her spine. Nora's breath caught. Julian didn't flinch, didn't even rush to grab the towel. Instead, he smirked and bent, slowly, deliberately, to retrieve it. Nora spun around so fast she nearly tripped over her own feet. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't... Behind her, Julian let out a low, amused laugh. Guess that sexy white dress blinded me. Technically, I walked into you. Nora's hands, acting on instinct, darted to cover the slight dip of cleavage the dress revealed. Her cheeks flamed. Julian stepped closer, one hand gently pulling hers away. Don't do that, he said softly. You look incredible. Really. She blinked. And be fair, he added, grinning. You saw everything. Let a guy enjoy a little balance. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Oh my God, she muttered, bolting past him into the kitchen. I'm going shopping. Need a bodyguard? Julian called out behind her. Only if you promise to wear pants. Nora stepped into Charleston's historic district a little before noon, armed with a modest credit card and the desperate urge to reclaim some normalcy. She wandered through the cobbled streets, letting herself get lost among pastel buildings and wrought iron balconies. Window shopping turned into actual shopping: light dresses, a new pair of flats, and a pair of delicate earrings she couldn't resist. She felt like herself again. Sort of. But just beneath the surface of that borrowed normalcy, something tugged at her. A quiet urgency she couldn't shake. "Who are you, Julian Andrews?" Her feet moved before her brain could protest. A narrow alley off King Street led her to a dim little internet cafe, barely big enough for 4 computers and a vending machine humming in the corner. The walls were a fading sunflower yellow, and the air smelled faintly of burnt sugar and overheated plastic. She hesitated for a moment at the keyboard, fingers hovering above the keys like they were booby-trapped. "Don't do it," a part of her warned. "Don't dig. Don't ruin the fantasy." But fantasies didn't come with secrets. She typed, "Julian Andrews, Tech CEO. Adrian Andrews, Neural Prediction, Silicon Valley." The search results came in a tidal wave: photos, press releases, articles from Wired, Forbes, Fast Company, glossy images of him in suits, on stages, shaking hands with names she recognized from the news. And then, her stomach clenched: gossip columns, photos with models, event appearances, a dating timeline. Blonde, brunette, redhead. All stunning, all interchangeable. Nora's eyes lingered on one headline: "Tech's golden boy keeps his private life. Very public." She clicked away from the page. The cafe's screen went dark for a second, and in the reflection she saw herself. Wide green eyes, messy ponytail, bookstore girl from Brooklyn pretending she hadn't just poked a hole in the story she was living. So, he was that kind of billionaire. "What are you doing, Nora?" Whatever they were in Charleston, it didn't change who he'd been before, or who he might still be. Back at the house, Julian had taken a different approach to decompressing. He sat at the edge of a pier by the water, fishing rod in hand, line drifting lazily in the current. He didn't catch a thing. But it wasn't about the fish. It was about the silence, the rhythm, the breathing space. He tried not to think about her, failed miserably. Every small thing from that week kept flooding back: the way her brow furrowed when she read, the way she lined up spices on the counter before cooking, the way she tucked her hair behind one ear when she laughed. It wasn't supposed to happen this fast. Hell, it wasn't supposed to happen at all. He was supposed to keep her safe, not want her, not crave the way she filled his space with warmth. And she had, in the most ordinary, disarming ways. He thought of the way she moved in the kitchen, barefoot, focused, her brows drawn as if preparing gnocchi was some kind of sacred ritual. She cooked it like it was love made edible. Every night, soft clouds of flour floated in the air, basil clung to her wrists, and the house smelled like comfort. Like something he never knew he missed. He had teased her, of course. "Gnocchi girl," he'd said. "If I eat one more gnocchi, I'm going to start dreaming in Italian." She'd tossed him a towel and told him to cook his own damn dinner. So he did. Once. Steak and fries, like a caveman reclaiming fire. She'd laugh so hard she snorted water through her nose. Julian sighed, leaned back on his elbows and stared up at the sky. She was unexpected. And in his world, unexpected usually meant dangerous, but with her, it just felt real. And God help him, he wanted more of it. Earlier that day, Julian had taken a call on the porch. Nora hadn't meant to listen, but his voice, lower than usual, cautious, carried through the screen door. When he returned, his expression had shifted. Lighter. Easier. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the marsh and the horizon glowed amber, he appeared beside her on the veranda with 2 glasses in hand. The ice clinked gently against the sides as he offered her one. "Gin and tonic, with lime. You look like you could use one." Nora raised an eyebrow. "You're awfully cheerful for someone in hiding." Julian gave her a crooked smile and leaned against the railing. Let's just say, 2 of the guys we were worried about won't be causing problems anymore, and the third is running out of places to hide. Nora blinked. Are you serious? He nodded, sipping his drink. FBI called this afternoon. They're closing in. Slowly. But it's progress. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That's good. Really good. Julian turned to her, his eyes bright. Which is why we're going out tonight. Nora stared. Out? As in, out? He grinned. Downtown, a jazz bar, maybe some dancing. I met a guy while pretending to fish. Turns out he's better at recommending places than catching trout. Julian, we're supposed to be laying low, she said, her tone cautious. We'll be ghosts, he said, lifting his hands in mock surrender. New clothes, different neighborhood. No one's looking for us in Charleston's music scene. Nora hesitated, but he was already walking toward the house. I'll take your silence as a yes, he called over his shoulder. Wear something that makes you feel dangerous. The Charleston heat lingered into the evening, wrapping the city in a velvet hush, broken only by the distant echo of jazz spilling from open windows. Downtown, the narrow streets buzzed with quiet life, couples strolling, laughter rising from cafe patios, heels tapping on cobblestone. Come on, Julian said with a smile, holding out his hand. Nora hesitated at the threshold of the small, dimly lit club, her heels clicking once on the worn wooden floor. Inside, a live band played something smooth and slow, a kind of bluesy rhythm that seemed to crawl up your spine and settle there. Nora walked in ahead of Julian, her red dress catching the eye of nearly every man in the room. It was casual, yes, but it clung in all the right places. The deep neckline, the soft fabric skimming her waist and hips, the way her hair tumbled loosely over her shoulders. She looked like trouble, the kind of trouble Julian didn't have the strength to resist tonight. He followed behind, wearing a crisp white linen shirt, sleeves casually rolled up, and camel-colored pants that gave him a rugged, bohemian air. She noticed the way he looked. Of course she did. Why does he have to look like that? Like he just stepped out of a slow-motion scene with his sun-kissed skin and quiet confidence? Her pulse betrayed her. We shouldn't, she said, glancing around. We're supposed to be laying low. And we are, he replied. No one here knows who we are. Tonight, we're just 2 strangers who happened to meet in Charleston. She looked at him. White shirt rolled at the sleeves, collar open just enough to hint at the heat beneath his skin, eyes glowing faint gold in the dim lights, and sighed. 1 drink, she said. He grinned. And 1 dance. The club was intimate, bathed in amber light. The floor creaked beneath their feet as he led her to a small table in the corner. They shared a cocktail, bourbon and something citrus, and talked about nothing. About the music, about how humid her hair always got in the South. It was easy, and it was dangerous. Nora hadn't expected to enjoy it. Not really. She thought she'd sit stiffly in a corner, nursing a drink while pretending to be invisible. But Julian changed that. When the band slowed into something darker and sweeter, he stood and held out his hand again. This time, she didn't hesitate. They moved together like they'd done it 100 times, his hand on her waist, her fingers grazing his collar, the space between them humming. He smelled like cedar and rain and something she couldn't name but wanted to memorize. She laughed once when he spun her too fast and almost lost her balance. He caught her, and for a moment they didn't move, didn't speak, just breathed. For a heartbeat they stood still in the center of the crowd. His hand gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Ice blue eyes bore into hers. Not flirtatious, not teasing. Something deeper. Intense. Quietly devastating. What are you doing to me? She thought. Her hands found his chest, steady, warm, alive. Beneath her palms, she felt his heart thudding fast. Her fingers brushed his collar, then, without fully realizing, traced the edge of his jaw, the curve of his bottom lip. And that's when he kissed her. The first kiss was gentle, experimental. Soft, deliberate contact. Just his lips on hers, testing, wondering, asking. Like he was memorizing the feel of her mouth. She shivered. He paused, his forehead resting against hers, struggling with something deeper than desire. A war between restraint and need. He stopped suddenly, pressing his forehead to hers, his hands tightening slightly on her hips, as if to anchor himself. God, don't let me lose control, he told himself. Not yet. Not here. Don't rush this. He pulled back slightly, searching her face. Nora whispered, barely audible, "Julian." A smirk played at his mouth. He reached for her shoulder, lifting the thin strap of her dress that had slid halfway down her arm. "It's late," he said, voice husky and low. "Let's get you home." He didn't wait for a reply. He just took her hand, grabbed her small purse from the table and guided her toward the exit. Nora followed, dazed. What just happened? Why did he stop? Out on the sidewalk, the air was cooler. The world felt quieter. They didn't speak on the walk to the car. Julian didn't look at her, but his grip on her hand was firm, protective, unshakable. He's in control, she thought, her stomach fluttering. He decides what happens and when, and I just go along, like a good girl. She stared at him as they drove. The man who had kissed her like she was glass, and then stopped, like he was made of steel. And she had no idea what to do with that. When they got home, the night wrapped around them like a heavy cloak. Nora fumbled with the keys, her hands still shaky. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. And she could still hear the beat of the club echoing in her ribs. "I had a good time," she said too brightly, forcing a smile, pretending her heart hadn't nearly exploded. "It was fun." Julian gave a quiet nod. "Yeah, it was." Then, just before walking past her, he added, "I'm gonna go for a run." "Can't sleep." She nodded, watching him disappear into his room. Her mind spun. Run? Now? He was doing it again. Retreating. Containing. Controlling. And all she could do was stand there like an idiot with flushed cheeks and questions she wasn't brave enough to ask. "Okay. I'll head to bed then," she mumbled, moving toward her door. Her thoughts spiraled the moment it shut behind her. What was that? Why did he stop? Why does he get to decide when things start and end? She paced the room, tried to breathe. 2 more weeks. Just 2 weeks. And then this fantasy ends. This vacation. This illusion. Everyone goes back to real life. He goes back to his billionaire orbit. She goes back to... what? The bookstore? Don't be stupid, Nora. He's not for you. She looked out the window. Charleston's marshland washed in moonlight. Still, quiet, aching. Snob, she whispered to herself. But he wasn't. Not really. In 2 weeks, she'd seen layers no headline could capture. The man who chopped vegetables and trimmed hedges, who made her laugh and watched her gnocchi obsession with mock horror, who respected her space, her mind, her boundaries, even when she wasn't sure she had any. He had lost his brother only a month ago, and yet, he was still trying. Too hard, maybe, for someone carrying fresh grief. He's strong, Nora thought. Strong in a way that hid itself behind teasing jokes, soft silences, and that charming grin. But she could feel the height of the walls he kept around him, walls maybe built to protect more than just secrets. She sighed. And tonight? I think I hit one of them. Nora was lost in her own thoughts when the sudden slam of a door from somewhere inside the house jolted her. Her body tensed instinctively as she turned her head toward her own bedroom door. Then came the sound. Firm, unmistakable footsteps approaching, each one louder, closer, steady in their direction. They were headed straight for her. She froze. The door opened. Not slowly, not with doubt, but with the sure, precise motion of a man who knew exactly what he wanted. Julian stood there, bare-chested, damp hair tousled, gray sweatpants riding low on his hips. His chest rose and fell in measured rhythm, but his eyes burned with desire. For a moment she couldn't breathe. He looked like something carved out of storm clouds and firelight. And that expression, focused, silent, resolute, rooted her to the floor. He didn't say a word. He crossed the room in 3 steps and scooped her into his arms, gripping her thighs, lifting her off the ground as if she weighed nothing. His mouth met hers not with gentleness, but with hunger, with claim. Her fingers slid under his shirt, nails grazing hot skin, dragging a shiver from deep within him. He pressed her back against the wall with a hunger he couldn't restrain, hips tight against hers, the heat between them sharp and undeniable. He whispered to her ear, "Say something," his breath tickling her collarbone. She looked up, her chest rising and falling in shallow gasps, lips parted, eyes glazed with need. "Don't stop," she whispered, barely holding herself together. There was no more waiting, no more holding back. And Nora, breathless and trembling, knew this was the moment she'd never forget. Hours later, tangled in linen sheets and the stillness of dawn, Julian brushed a strand of hair from Nora's face. She looked at him like she still wasn't quite sure he was real. "What now?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He just kissed her again. The next 2 days blurred into something unreal. They didn't leave the house. They barely left the bed. But when they did, it wasn't silence that filled the gaps between them anymore. It was stories. Nora told him about growing up in Virginia, about her father's job that took them to Lake Como when she was a child, about the tiny kitchen where she learned to make gnocchi with a neighbor who barely spoke English, about the bookstore she never planned to work in but stayed at because it was safe, about dreams she'd shelved. Julian listened, and when she fell asleep, he traced the outline of her spine like he was memorizing a map. He told her about Adrienne, about their childhood, about how Adrienne had always seen the world in algorithms and risks, about the night he found Adrienne's body and how something inside him broke and never quite fit back together, how he carried the guilt like a second skin. He didn't cry, but Nora did. That morning, Nora had just stepped out of the shower. She could smell something warm, something toasty. Pancakes. Wrapped in a towel, barefoot and curious, she crept into the kitchen doorway and saw him. Julian, shirtless, in nothing but boxers, brow furrowed like he was performing surgery rather than flipping batter. She leaned silently against the doorframe, watching him flick his wrist, flip the pancake, then hiss. "Shit." She stepped forward. "Did you burn yourself?" He turned, surprised. "Were you watching me this whole time?" Nora smirked, grabbing a handful of ice from the freezer. She walked over and gently pressed it to his finger. "This should help." "Oh, Nurse Nora," he murmured. "You really do know how to heal a man." Before she could reply, Julian took the melting cube and trailed it lightly over her shoulder, then lower, slipping her towel an inch down. "Julian," she whispered, heart racing. He smirked, wicked and slow. "You standing there in nothing but a towel, watching me. You were asking for trouble, darlin'." In one swift movement, he pulled her towel free and lifted her onto the counter. His mouth found hers hungrily, urgently, as the scent of burning pancakes filled the room. "Julian," she gasped, breathless. "The pancakes." He grinned against her mouth. "Babe, there's something far more delicious right here." She didn't argue. The doorbell rang. Loud, sharp, repeated. Nora froze. Julian, she whispered. Who could that be? Julian gently set her down, wrapped the towel back around her, and kissed her forehead. Probably a neighbor. Stay here. She darted into the bedroom, heart pounding. Through the crack of the door, she listened. Men's voices. A pause. Then Julian called out, Nora! It's the detective. You can come out if you want. He's got news. Nora threw on jeans and a loose shirt, then stepped into the hall. The detective was already inside, scanning the room with an amused expression. Looks like your witness protection is going quite comfortably, Julian, he said with a raised brow. Julian gave a faint, sheepish smile. We're managing. They sat. Nora's cheeks burned. She avoided the detective's eyes until Julian reached over and took her hand, grounding her. So? Julian asked. What's the verdict? Detective Morris leaned back in the armchair, legs crossed, fingers tapping lightly on the folder resting on his knee. He looked at Julian and Nora for a long moment before speaking. Well, he said, voice calm but firm, the worst is over, at least for now. Julian sat on the couch, one arm resting behind Nora, who sat slightly forward, hands clasped in her lap. We've apprehended 2 of the men involved, Morris continued. The third, your charming friend from the alley, slipped through, but he's on our radar. Won't get far. Julian's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. Still, the detective added, my advice? Don't go back to your old lives. Not yet. Lay low. Start fresh. Somewhere no one expects you to be. He looked directly at Nora. At least 6 months. After that, we'll reassess. Until then, don't make yourselves easy to find. Nora nodded slowly. Her heart was pounding louder than his voice. She didn't realize she was holding her breath. Morris leaned forward, setting the folder on the coffee table. Tell me where you want to go. The Bureau will arrange private transport, no questions asked. Both of you. You'll be dropped off separately, at your chosen locations. He paused. You're free. More or less. Julian cleared his throat. I appreciate it. Really. Everything you've done. The detective smirked. You made it easy. That fob, that system your brother built, it's in good hands now. Secure, classified, off the map. The kind of thing that won't be used until we damn well know how to keep it under control. Julian looked down. It was all Adrian. Maybe, but he trusted you to finish it. Morris stood, brushing non-existent dust from his slacks. And you did. That counts. He turned to leave, then glanced back with a faint grin. And Julian, try to behave yourself from here on out, huh? Julian chuckled dryly. No promises. The door closed behind the agent with a soft click. The house felt too quiet after the door shut. The kind of silence that presses against your chest, reminding you something had just ended. Or maybe something else was about to begin. Julian didn't speak right away. He stood by the window, arms folded, watching the marsh ripple under the golden light of early evening. Nora stayed seated on the couch, still processing everything. Finally, he turned around. I'm going back to California, he said quietly. To the town Adrian and I grew up in. Mendocino. It's small, quiet, off the grid. No one from the valley would expect me there. Nora swallowed, unsure what to say. Her fingers knotted in her lap. Julian walked over slowly and sat beside her. I'm not going back to the company. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He looked at her, his voice low and steady. I want something different now. Then, he paused. For a moment, he just looked at her. Really looked, as if trying to memorize every angle of her face. Come with me, Nora. Nora blinked. There it was. The thing she'd been waiting for, and dreading. She started, then stopped. Julian's eyes didn't waver. You don't have to answer right now. But I needed to say it. Nora stood up, pacing slightly, one hand rubbing the back of her neck. Julian, this, us, it's all been so intense, so fast. I know. You're used to moving through the world like it belongs to you. I'm not. She looked over her shoulder at him. I don't even know what this is yet. Julian stood, closing the space between them. I do. His hand gently touched her arm. I know what I feel, and I know I don't want to lose it. Nora's throat tightened. She hated how much she wanted to believe him, but she also knew herself. Knew the fear that wrapped around her like armor. I just need time, she whispered. Julian nodded. Take it. He didn't beg. He didn't push. He just kissed her forehead, softly, reverently, before stepping back. I'll have them take you wherever you want, he said. And if you ever change your mind? He hesitated. I'll be exactly where I said I'd be. Nora blinked hard, holding back tears. Okay. He gave her a sad smile. Then I guess this is goodbye. The private terminal was quiet, eerily so. No bustling lines, no boarding calls, just polished marble floors, soft leather seating, and the low murmur of engines outside. The sky burned tangerine behind the hangars. 2 jets waited on the tarmac. One headed west, the other north. Nora stood in the lounge with a small suitcase by her side. She wore a pale blue linen dress, her hair pulled into a loose knot. Her heart thudded in her chest like it didn't know which direction to follow. Julian stood across from her, hands in his pockets, watching her with the calm intensity that had undone her more times than she could count. This feels surreal, she whispered. I know, he said. A silence settled between them, heavy and full of unsaid things. Julian took a step closer. He looked down at her, memorizing her, drinking her in like the last light before dark. I'm not good at goodbyes, he said quietly. Then don't say one, she replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Just tell me you'll be okay. He nodded slowly. I will. If you promise to be too. Her throat closed. She hated the way it felt like something was tearing just beneath her ribs. Julian leaned in then, like he was about to kiss her, but he didn't. He pressed his forehead to hers instead, his breath soft against her cheek. Take care of yourself, Nora, he murmured. And if someday you change your mind, I know where you'll be, she finished, voice breaking. He pulled back. His eyes glinted, but he didn't let the tears fall. Neither did she. The final boarding calls echoed through the hallway. The pilots were ready. Julian reached for her hand one last time, held it, squeezed, then let go. He turned and walked toward his gate. Nora watched him go, his tall frame silhouetted against the golden light. And then she turned too. As she walked down the opposite corridor, her breath hitched, her steps slowed, her eyes blurred, but she didn't stop. Snow hadn't fallen yet in Washington, but the air held that crisp, quiet promise of winter. Nora crossed the street with her scarf pulled tight around her chin, the faded canvas tote on her shoulder filled with newly returned library books. She pushed through the doors of the Georgetown Public Library, her breath fogging in the glass, and offered a tired smile to the woman at the front desk. Morning, she mumbled. The woman nodded, barely looking up. The job was temporary, a part-time position cataloging returns and managing a dusty side archive no one really visited. It wasn't bad. But it wasn't hers. What she wanted was to open her own bookstore. Small, warm, full of old wood shelves and fresh coffee. A place people could lose time in. But dreams take money. And her heart was still tangled in South Carolina. Every day, she told herself, you did the right thing. You chose real life, stability, family. Not a fantasy wrapped in linen shirts and secrets, But then she'd pass the Italian bakery on Wisconsin Avenue, and the scent of warm bread would hit her like a fist. She'd think of Julian. She'd remember his smile when she made gnocchi, his hands in her hair, the way he looked at her like she was both a challenge and a miracle. Some nights, she wondered if he ever meant to reach out, or if that chapter was really over. Maybe she was just another story in his chaotic, beautiful life. Maybe he was already writing a new one. The house was quiet, as usual. Her parents had gone to bed early, and Nora sat curled up on the living room couch with a wool blanket and a cup of cold tea she'd forgotten to drink. The TV was on, muted, some old black and white movie flickering in the background. Her laptop sat open on the coffee table, its dim screen glowing in the dark. She wasn't even planning to check her email, just muscle memory, a click, a breath. And then, she saw it. From Julian Andrews. Subject, come find me. Time, 9:11 p.m. Her stomach flipped. Nora stared at the screen, fingers frozen above the keyboard. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Then, slowly, she clicked. Nora, I didn't think missing you would get easier. I just didn't realize it would get worse. 5 months. That's how long it's been since I've heard your voice. Since you looked at me like I wasn't a headline or a stranger on your couch. I'm in Italy. Como. Remember when you told me you lived here as a kid? That you dreamed of coming back? Well, I'm here now. And I brought a piece of you with me. Attached is a photo. It's the view from a little restaurant by the lake. On the table? Your favorite dish? Gnocchi with tomato and basil. The caption under it just says, not as good as yours. Also attached, a plane ticket. Tomorrow, Milan. I'll be there. If you don't come, I'll wait one day. Then I'll fly to you myself. Because I've already lost too much. And I won't lose you too. Julian. The house was quiet, as usual. Her parents had gone to bed early, and Nora sat curled up on the living room couch with a wool blanket and a cup of cold tea she'd forgotten to drink. The TV was on, muted, some old black and white movie flickering in the background. Her laptop sat open on the coffee table, its dim screen glowing in the dark. She wasn't even planning to check her email, just muscle memory, a click, a breath. And then, she saw it. From Julian Andrews. Subject, come find me. Time, 9:11 p.m. Her stomach flipped. Nora stared at the screen, fingers frozen above the keyboard. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Then, slowly, she clicked. Nora, I didn't think missing you would get easier. I just didn't realize it would get worse. 5 months. That's how long it's been since I've heard your voice. Since you looked at me like I wasn't a headline or a stranger on your couch. I'm in Italy. Como. Remember when you told me you lived here as a kid? That you dreamed of coming back? Well, I'm here now. And I brought a piece of you with me. Attached is a photo. It's the view from a little restaurant by the lake. On the table? Your favorite dish? Gnocchi with tomato and basil. The caption under it just says, not as good as yours. Also attached, a plane ticket. Tomorrow, Milan. I'll be there. If you don't come, I'll wait one day. Then I'll fly to you myself. Because I've already lost too much. And I won't lose you too. Julian. Nora's hand flew to her mouth. She reread the email 3 times, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She clicked on the attachment. The photo opened slowly. There it was, Como Lake, bathed in sunset gold. A restaurant table near the railing, a plate of steaming gnocchi, and beside it, a folded napkin, scrawled in Julian's handwriting, the library's waiting for you. I built the shelves, but I can't fill them without you. Her breath caught. No, this wasn't real, and yet, her suitcase was still in the back of her closet. And her heart? still very much packed for something she thought she'd left behind. She stood up. Her tea spilled on the carpet, forgotten. Washington Dulles Airport was humming with the usual noise: rolling suitcases, gate announcements, the soft hiss of espresso machines. But for Nora, everything felt distant, like a soundtrack she no longer belonged to. She walked slowly toward Gate B17, ticket clutched tightly in her hand. Milan, Malpensa, one way. Her fingers trembled slightly as she handed over her boarding pass. The agent smiled, but she barely saw him. As she walked through the jet bridge, her breath hitched. She remembered his voice, his hands, that stupid crooked smile when he teased her about the gnocchi. She took her seat by the window, fastened her belt. Her reflection stared back from the dark glass, eyes wide, mouth parted in disbelief. She'd done it. She was flying to him, to Julian. As the plane pulled away from the gate and the engines hummed louder, Nora closed her eyes. She didn't know what would happen. She just knew. He was waiting. And this time, she wouldn't make him wait long. Thank you for staying with me through Nora and Julian's story. Tell me honestly, what would you have done in Nora's place? Would you have taken that flight, not knowing what waited on the other side? Let me know in the comments. And tell me, where in the world are you listening from? Until next time, take care.